The tea in Margaret's cup had long gone cold, but she didn't move. Her hands rested flat on the kitchen table, palms down, as though bracing herself against the weight of the words still hanging in the air. Across from her, James sat with his wedding band turning slowly between his fingers. "I've been thinking," he began again, quieter this time, as if saying it softly could dull the edge. "About another marriage." The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. Somewhere in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence that had swallowed the house whole. Margaret didn't flinch, didn't cry. She simply looked at him, a steady gaze he couldn't quite meet. The kitchen around them was the same as it had been for decades. The same oak cabinets they'd saved for in their 20s, the ceramic rooster salt shaker she'd bought on a trip to Maine, the worn linoleum where they'd danced once after their anniversary dinner. All of it felt suddenly distant, like a photograph curling at the edges. James's voice wavered, but he pressed on. "It's not about leaving you. It's about companionship." In a different way. She still didn't move. Not her hands, not her shoulders. Only her eyes shifted slightly, scanning his face as if trying to find the man she had once trusted. Enough to build a life with. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, pulling him toward the window for the briefest escape. But when he looked back, Margaret was still there, unmoved, unbroken, unreadable. Her lips parted just enough for her voice to slip through, low and even. "After everything we've built, this is what you've been considering." He opened his mouth, but no sound came. She leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking softly, and in that small, measured motion, James felt something shift, not in her, but in the ground between them. Something fragile had just cracked. James didn't sleep that night. The bedroom felt smaller than usual, every creak of the old house amplified in the dark. Margaret lay still beside him, her back turned, breathing slow and deliberate. He could tell she wasn't asleep either. By morning, the quiet had sharpened into something heavier. At the breakfast table, she placed his coffee in front of him without looking up. "Eleanor called last night," she said evenly. "She heard from her husband that you've been talking about this idea of yours." He stiffened. "I never said it was a decision. It was just a consideration." She cut him off gently, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Do you understand what that sounds like after 42 years of marriage?" The phone rang in the living room. Neither moved to answer it. When it rang again later that afternoon, James picked up. His son's voice came through, low and deliberate. "Dad, if you're thinking of changing things, maybe it's time to sort the estate now. You know, so no one has to fight later." It wasn't phrased as a demand, but James felt the undertone. His chest tightened. "We're not talking about that right now. You've worked hard your whole life," his son continued. "You wouldn't want the wrong person ending up with what you built." That night, Margaret sat in the den with the television on, volume low, eyes fixed on a muted documentary. James stood in the doorway, watching her profile lit by the flicker of the screen. She didn't glance his way to eye in the dim light. He felt the walls of his own home closing in, not from her silence alone, but from the unspoken question that now hovered between them. Was his marriage still a safe place, or had he already set something irreversible in motion? It was 2 days later when the package arrived. James found it on the porch just after sunrise, a plain brown box with his name written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. No return address. He carried it into the kitchen, setting it on the counter. Beside the fruit bowl, Margaret came in moments later, hair still damp from her shower. Her eyes lingered on the box. "Who's it from?" "No idea," he said, reaching for the scissors. But before he could cut through the tape, she placed her hand over his. Weight. There was weight to the box, not heavy, but solid. When he tilted it, something inside shifted with a muted clink. Margaret's gaze held steady, a small crease forming between her brows. "Open it carefully." Inside was a single folder. A red tab stuck out from the side, with his name written on it in thick black ink. He glanced at Margaret. She didn't move closer. James slid the papers out. At first glance, they looked like financial records, his financial records, but altered. Bank statements showing transfers he'd never made. A copy of a will, not in his handwriting, naming someone else as a beneficiary. His stomach dropped. Margaret leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Someone wants you to see this," she said quietly. "And someone wants you scared." A faint buzz came from the counter. James's phone lit up with a text from an unknown. Number. You should settle things before others do it for you. By evening. The folder was locked in the desk drawer in his study, but it might as well have been sitting in the middle of the dining table. The air in the house felt different, heavier, charged. When Margaret passed him in the hallway that night, her voice was low but unshakable. This isn't just about marriage anymore, James. Someone's drawing lines, and they're not planning to keep this civil. The rain had started just before dusk, tapping softly against the living room windows. James sat in his armchair, the folder untouched on the coffee table between them. Margaret was across from him, curled into the corner of the sofa, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The television was off. For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet was thick, but not empty. It held years of shared mornings, road trips, late-night laughter, and now, the ache of something breaking. Margaret reached for the photo frame on the end table. It was from the summer of '89, the two of them standing in front of their first house, his arms slung around her shoulders, her hair windblown and sunlit. She studied it for a long time, her thumb brushing the edge of the glass. "When you were working those double shifts at the mill," she said softly, "I used to keep a pot of coffee on the stove so it would be hot when you walked through the door. I'd wait up even if it was 2 in the morning." James swallowed, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I didn't do that because I had to," she continued. "I did it because we were building something together. Every sacrifice meant something, and I thought we understood that." He finally looked at her, but her eyes were still on the photograph. "You've been considering another marriage," she said, her tone steady but edged with something raw. But before you even said the words out loud, the vultures started circling. And now, I have to wonder, are you protecting me, James? Or are you just protecting yourself? The question landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. James leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, and felt the truth pressing in from all sides. When he opened them, Margaret was setting the photograph back on the table with deliberate care. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "I can't keep saving you from the consequences you invite." The morning the lawyer arrived, the air in the house was still. No rain, no wind, just the kind of quiet that made every sound deliberate. James stood by the dining table, papers spread neatly before him. Margaret sat at the far end, her coffee untouched. The lawyer, a tall man with a calm, measured voice, slid the revised documents toward James. "Once you sign, the estate will be locked. No amendments without both signatures. And your assets will be distributed exactly as outlined. No early access, no third-party claims." James nodded slowly, the weight of the pen in his hand heavier than it should have been. He glanced at Margaret. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no anger in it now, only resolve. His signature was quick, final. The lawyer gathered the papers, sliding them into a leather folder. "You've made a strong decision," he said quietly, before taking his leave. Margaret rose without a word and carried her mug into the kitchen. James followed, leaning against the doorway. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, the words uneven. She rinsed the cup, set it in the rack, and turned to face him. "I know, but intentions don't protect a marriage, James. Choices do." He looked at her for a long moment, realizing that something in her had shifted beyond repair. Yet there was also a strange calm settling in the room, the kind that came when a battle was over. Even if the ground still felt scorched. 2 days later, the final copies arrived in the mail. James placed them in the desk drawer where the threatening folder had once been. This time, when the drawer closed, the sound was soft, almost gentle. That evening, they ate dinner at the small table by the window. No wine, no celebration. Just the quiet act of two people sharing a meal, not as they once were, but as they had chosen to be now, bound by a different kind of truth and an unspoken acceptance that some doors, once closed, should never be opened again.